Hello, everyone. Welcome in for those trickling in. Welcome, welcome.
Hey, Richard, if you can make Heather the host, that would be helpful on our end. Please.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
Of course. Yes.
While we wait, feel free to check out our link tree and see what we've been posting on LinkedIn and Instagram. SDEIB has been circulating some really great content for Black History Month, and there's always something to celebrate. So check it out, and we'll be starting soon.
Thank you for the message, Lordina. Totally fine. We're just glad you're here. And for everyone else, thank you as you're joining. Totally understand if folks are not in a place to turn on their video or audio. No worries there.
Okay, we'll begin now. So hi everyone and good afternoon. And before proceeding with the event and with introducing Heather here, I really want to wish everyone a very, very happy Black History Month. And I know everyone is celebrating in their own ways, and SDIB is celebrating here with this workshop. So we're starting with the spring program with the very first event on conscious job search with Heather Davis, and we'll be learning a lot about, in the job search, how you can integrate DEI with it. So, Heather would be walking us through it. But before that, just for everyone who is here and who is not aware about SDIB, so we are a Society for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Business, and we really wanted to promote empowerment and networking related to DEI in business. That's more of our mission. And we really vision to see and empower a lot of future business leaders to celebrate DEI in business as well. So that's about SDEIB. And today, the guest of honor here is Heather. It's been a real pleasure to be working with you for this particular event. I've not attended your previous sessions, but it's really amazing to see you present today and see you virtually here. So Heather Davis, we really welcome you for this event and how things go and how we learn about conscious job search. So over to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the warm introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here in a bit, but again, I'm Heather. I live in Chicago, but I'm actually a former Panther, went to Georgia State for my master's in social work a handful of years ago without revealing my age. And now work in Chicago, been working within several different spaces, nonprofit, education, for-profit space. And I'm currently working with collegeadvisor.com. So supporting families and students with the college admissions process. So excited to be here. I am going to share my screen with you here. Give me 1 second. And as I'm doing that, want to just again shout out the SDEIB team for putting this together. So thank you all for making this happen. Not an easy task to do. So thank you for organizing all of this. What I'm going to show here is, here we go. If I can get my slides to work. It's just kind of a little quick introduction of what we'll be doing together today. This is meant to be largely interactive if folks are able. If not, that's totally okay. But I first want to tackle kind of the why, around kind of why we're here together. Obviously, you're bought into sharing kind of these values around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. If you have showed up here, if you're a part of this space. And with that, we'll really kind of discuss today having that raised consciousness when looking for jobs. I know some of us are on the hunt now, maybe you will be in the future, or maybe you've already secured something for the next year, but together we'll be discussing and sharing some tools for conscious job searching and keeping kind of DEI and B at the core of what we do. So just a few norms just to kind of look at together. 3 things I think are really important, and I hope we can all agree also are important for our time together. Lean in as much as possible. I know some folks may be in transit or working or kind of doing other things, completely fine. But we also need to learn from each other. So let's lean into kind of respecting each other. Feel free if you have questions or thoughts, put them in the chat, kind of do a hand raise, chime in if need be. This is meant to be largely, again, discussion based. And then be as present as you can be. Again, I know everyone's always doing their best. And so if you are currently somewhere else where you can't, unmute, totally fine. This is a safe space for that. But as much as possible, try to be present, offer that respect for other perspectives, and lean into the conversation. Okay. Now, want to kind of quickly go through our agenda together. We'll just tackle a few things, again, collectively. We'll start with discussing a bit more and identifying our values as individuals, and then what it looks like to explore and discover the values of potential employers. It's a huge thing that sometimes can feel like a task that's difficult to do. So we'll talk about some practical ways to do that. And then finally, we'll look at together steps to continue advocating for D&I and B from within once we do get hired into that new position. This is something that's very relevant to me personally as well as professionally. I've been kind of always in the job market and making sure that I'm aware of what companies are looking for and how I can be a fit and vice versa. And so this is something that I connect with both personally and professionally, which we'll also talk about. So did not get a chance to actually make the true Zoom poll. So I'm gonna put it on the screen. I'm gonna read it aloud in case you're not able to see your screen, but for just 2 minutes, I want to take a poll of who's here. So the question is, and feel free, put your response either in the chat. You can also come off of mute. But the first question is, where are you in your education/professional journey? Are you A, I'm gonna graduate soon, I'm currently on the job hunt? Do you identify with B, I'm going to graduate next year, 2024, not quite job searching yet? Are you C, I have no idea when this college thing's going to end? Or are you D, I'm not a student at all? So feel free, you can drop your response in the chat. Feel free to also, if you want, come off of mute. And I'm curious if Anne or someone wants to also read off, if you have any responses you're seeing, feel free to do that. I can do it on my end too. But if there's responses coming in, feel free to read them aloud if that feels right. But I'll give everyone a second to do that. Treasure, I see your hand is raised. Come on, Treasure, what's on your mind?
I'll say I'm somewhere between B and C.
B and C. Okay. Not quite job searching yet, but also not quite sure when this college thing will be over. Very fair. In between. Love that. Love that.
And I'm set to graduate in May. Woo, woo, woo.
Hey,
So
hey.
crazy town. So definitely currently on the job hunt and, navigating all the pieces of life that are informing that decision. So
Yeah,
always an
absolutely.
adventure.
Absolutely. And I think I saw Lordina ask, can we read the options again? Yes. Option A is I'm graduating soon. I'm on the job search. Option B, I'm going to graduate next year, 2024, but I'm not quite job searching yet. Option C is I have no idea when college will be over, or D, I am not a student. So whatever you identify with there, those would be the options. Lordina says A, graduate in December. Exciting. Congrats to those who are graduating, and not even just this year, but treasure for you in the near future and everyone else. It's exciting. Okay. So it sounds like we have a variety of kind of perspectives here. I think no matter where we're all at in this journey together, there's a lot of kind of valuable insight that we'll have and share together here. That'll be relevant, whether it's for this year, next year, or the near future, whatever that may look like. And what we'll kind of start with as we dive into discussing this process is just a quick review of terms. Again, these are all likely familiar to everyone here since you do obviously share these values, but just a quick review. When we're talking about diversity, largely we're talking about representation of backgrounds and identities within whether a company, a community, and equity, we're referring to access to opportunity, inclusion, respectful and fair treatment of all, and then belonging, a feeling of being accepted in the workplace. These are obviously very oversimplified definitions, but just want to make sure we're starting on the same foundation when we are talking about DEI and D. And oftentimes I know we all have probably seen companies say they value these things or they may mention them. Sometimes it may feel performative, other times it may feel like it's true. So we'll talk and dive in a little bit more into how to discern that. Okay, so want to kind of give folks a few moments to think about this part around kind of personal values. We talk a lot about how as a group, we obviously value those different items we just listed, but I want to kind of let everyone kind of sit for just a couple minutes and think, what do I value, right? What are my personal and or professional values? And think through maybe 2 or 3. So I'm gonna give everyone just a couple minutes. If I had some great music, I would play. Currently Lauryn Hill is my go-to playlist right now. So pretend you're vibing to something that suits you, but spend just a couple minutes. And I want everyone here to try to reflect or think through what are 2 or 3 values that you hold, whether they be personal values or professional values. And again, there's some examples at the bottom, but we'll just spend a couple moments here reflecting, and then we'll do some share out here. And we'll take another minute. If you just joined us, we were doing some quick reflection, and if you're able to jot something down, feel free, or jot down in your head, but what are 2 to 3 values that you hold, whether they be personal values, professional values, but what is important to you? Let's take another minute, and then we'll discuss. Okay. So this was, to me, this is even challenging because I don't often pause to think about my own values. I think I'm so busy thinking through other things that this is a exercise that's difficult for me. So I'll quickly just share out what I was thinking about. Would love if folks want to share a couple that you identify with. Feel free to put it in the chat. Feel free to come off of mute. For me, just to quickly give an example, I noticed that for myself, transparency is very important to me, both personally in my friend group, but also when it comes to my professional life. And so when I'm looking at jobs, looking at employers, to me, it's really important that I see transparency in the job search process, but also that I'm able to have transparent conversations and see transparency in leadership and things of that nature. So transparency would be one of the ones that I was thinking about. Would anyone else like to share? This is totally challenge by choice, but anyone else like to share, whether it be in the chat or if you want to come off of mute and share something that you kind of resonated with?
Yeah, I'll share. I had, I was trying to think about the right way to word this one. I came up with follow through. For me, it's kind of a matter of respect, right? Self-respect and also respect for others. It ties really closely to another big one for me was community and collaboration. So just that notion of if you say you're going to do it, follow through, do what you have to follow through. And sometimes that means call for a lifeline, right? What have you? That's where the community piece comes in. But yeah, and I think that transcends both personal and professional for me. I hadn't, well, I thought it was an interview, it was like a pre-interview this morning, but that came up in the conversation, right? Like they said, you know, we need a self-starter, but you know, with that, it means ask for help when you need help, right? And it's, yeah. So I think that that's something I really stand for, and that's something I've navigated in the business school world. A lot of people are coming in with professional experience, while you have polarity with a lot of people with zero experience, also trying to engage in the same conversations. And there's a stigma behind sometimes some of the roles that people are pursuing of whether they can ask for help and what have you. Meanwhile, I'm coming from education background where it's just like, hey, let's learn, right? So yeah, anyway, so navigating that, I think the community and collaboration kind of vibe, and then also that notion of follow through.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Amy. All right.
I would just share, one of the things I wrote down is just an opportunity for to evolve, right? And I think that is both personally and professionally as well. If I'm looking at an organization, I want to be able to tangibly see how I can develop there, how I can, you know, add my mark, if you will. And then the other one I had wrote down is relationships. And so I think both work and professionally, I have learned about myself that I am an introvert. So I gain more energy right when I'm by myself, although I do love people. So I think with that in mind, I'm very intentional about when I spend time with others. And so both being at work and personal, I would say those are two of mine.
All right. Evolve and relationships. Thank you, Treasure.
I want to add something too. I believe expression is really, really important. Like if you feel something, you want to do something, you want to not do something, you have to speak up for yourself. Nobody else is going to do it for you. So like, it's really important, like both personally and professionally.
Yeah. Thank you. Expression. Absolutely. Anyone else like to share? And let me quickly check the chat really quick. I see valuing equality, especially for people with physical and mental disabilities. Absolutely, that's a good one. And I'm seeing respect and empathy, 100%. Assuming best intent, giving benefit of the doubts. Yep. All right, anyone else before we move forward? Perfect. Okay. Thank you all for those who shared. And I think, again, this is something that if I were to think back 10 years ago, my values and what I would see as my personal values or professional values may have been different. So this is something that continues to evolve with all of us. And Lordina, thank you for sharing too. You mentioned productivity and mutual respect. Love that. And so when thinking through kind of our own values that we hold as individuals, and a lot of these, I think, are also shared values that many of us hold, and many of the ones that talked about today, we probably could agree upon are all super relevant to many of us. Curious to hear, how do your personal values and or professional values shape your decisions? So for example, just kind of get things flowing in that direction. What shaped your decision that has to do with your values to attend or to state? What shapes your decisions about who you choose to spend your time with? what shapes or what values shape your decisions around where you view your next, place of employment. So I'm curious to kind of hear thoughts on that. Let's take another minute or two though to reflect. I believe strongly in pausing before we answer. So we'll just take another minute or so, but let's now shift to thinking through how do those values that you just mentioned or other values you hold, how do those shape your future decisions? All right, we'll take about 30 more seconds. Give folks 30 more seconds again to answer the question of how do your values shape same idea. Anyone want to kind of jump in and share with the group either an example of how your values have shaped your decisions or just your thoughts on this?
I think one of the items, I didn't mention this earlier, but I think this is probably not a good thing, but I'll just be a little bit vulnerable here. I think some of my decisions I make based on monetary value. So when you think of financial, gain, so from a work perspective, sometimes I think that can determine university, huge alumni network, and so that was another piece that allowed me to kind of make that decision.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks, Shredder.
I just wanted to add, like at times, there are times when you are influenced. So there are a lot of influential decisions you take as well as part of your study group or friend circle or community groups anywhere that you're part of. So at times it's in a bad way, but for me, majorly it just takes up in a neutral manner. So that's the influential decisions you take. That may go on to the bad section of peer pressure, but just talking about the neutral way around when you just be influenced of how other people are, pivoting their life or things like that, and how you pick up that and add up to your bucket of values.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think for me, that notion of community, I had parentheses collaboration next to it, because that's kind of the element of community. That's one of the components. There's that collaborative piece. There's also just the celebratory piece that comes with a sense of community and just support, right? But that has very much factored in as I've been looking for a new role. I took part in a 12-week sort of temp, almost like an internship essentially. And I very much learned what I don't want. And that was a job where I'd go in every day and I'd sit down at a computer and it's me and my screen all day, right? Not my jam. And I learned that, and it really highlighted for me the tie to that value of sense of community. So I know that I can be really intentional now as I do interview for positions in asking about team dynamics, asking about what the day-to-day looks like. Am I going to have that engagement with other people, right? Am I going to have that sense of purpose that drives me via that interdependency with a team? And so, yeah, hugely important for me right now as I'm looking for jobs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say too, and this is, I don't know if you all share this same sentiment, but I feel like what I value professionally has changed a lot since when I was in grad school, as an example. I feel like the priority at different times is finding the right role, finding the position that feels fulfilling. And there was times in my life to where the finances weren't quite as important, because to me it was, am I satisfied with this role, right? Am I able to feel like I'm a part of a team? Am I contributing? And I was willing to compromise on some other areas. And I feel like as time has gone on, to me, my values still remain that meaningful work is important, especially within social work, of course. I was at Georgia State. I know this is a business group, but within the School of Social Work, specifically at Georgia State, it's a macro perspective. So it's a lot of folks who end up in nonprofit management, who end up within businesses, but maybe in D&I. So you have kind of both perspectives of kind of the engagement with clients, but also within systems. But as I have navigated the past kind of, I would say 5 to 10 years, I value kind of flexibility, mobility, being able to move up within an organization. I value the financial piece more. And so it does prompt asking different questions in interviews, or it does prompt different conversations with supervisors. Not really willing to work for the same amount of money, obviously, that I was before, or willing to work 70 hours in the same way that I was before. So I also want to kind of speak to that I think this is something that evolves based off of where we are. What we value at any given time may change and grow. But it does, I like your point, Amy, it does prompt us to ask different questions or to seek out kind of different aspects of the job hunt.
Yeah. And I want to piggyback on that, Heather. I had a friend who said it so well, like hit the nail on the head with this term of seasonality, right? Mm-hmm. So as I was, grappling, I don't know what I want to do next. Like, do I want to try to find something full-time? I don't know. It's part-time what I need right now. Am I going to have to settle as a career changer, right? I'm top of the game in education. I could get any job I wanted, but when I'm going into a field where I don't have any experience, it's very humbling. But this notion of seasonality really resonated with me. And I think the reason I tie it in here is I don't know how others feel, but sometimes I have this sense of guilt or wanting related to my values. And, where I think, almost echoing a piece of what Treasure said, right? Of like, well, I'm going to admit this, I'm not super proud of it, but decisions are made based on money. But you know what? There's a season for that, right? There's a season for when that has to be part of your decision. And that might be a maturity thing, to your point, Heather, of, where we are in stages of career and personal life. But I think that seasonality word has just like struck a chord with me, and I see it applying here too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy. Anyone else have any thoughts that you wanted to share around how your values shape your decisions, whether it be personal decisions, professional decisions, next step decisions, anything like that? Okay. And some of what we've been discussing will also kind of connect to how we can kind of feel out also what are the values of the employers that we're looking at, and how does that kind of connect to ours. And so with that kind of in mind, I want to toss out another poll. So the poll question here, and again, feel free to answer in the chat or come off of mute, is how often do you currently utilize LinkedIn? This is obviously one of the main ways to search for employers. So is your answer A, I use LinkedIn daily, it's my jam? Is your answer B, weekly, I check it periodically? Do you identify with C, monthly, I barely have a profile? Or D, what is LinkedIn? So again, question is how often do you currently utilize LinkedIn? And then A is daily, B, weekly, C, monthly, D, what even is LinkedIn? Feel free to utilize the chat, and I see that it is popping. So let me check and see what people are saying. I see a lot of A's, fantastic. It is your jam, yes. An occasional B, okay. All right, so a lot of A and a little bit of B. I want to just bring this up just because I wanted to get a pulse of where folks are at with our current state of searching for employers, getting more familiar with what jobs are available in the industries. So great to see that there is obviously strong connection within LinkedIn. There's obviously other ways to learn about employers, but it's a good starting point. And with that, I want to kind of shift to talking about employer values. Obviously, sometimes this is clear for some employers. Others, it takes a lot of digging and other ways to navigate figuring out what is the culture of this company or this organization, or what do they believe in, what are their values truly, not just on a job posting. Again, would love to hear from the group. Again, use the chat if you like. You can come off of mute. But what is your opinion on this, or what's your experience with this? How do you learn the values of a company or an organization? What is your process of doing this? There's no wrong answer here, but I'm curious to hear what that looks like for each person. How do you learn the values of a company or organization? Treasurer, go ahead. I saw you raising that hand.
I would say that the best way I have found to do this is to speak to people who work there or have formerly worked there, and not necessarily the like spokespeople, if you will, of the organization, because there's things you're going to go to the website. There's never going to be something on the website that says, hey, we have like crappy values. Like, it's never going to say that, and it's going to all be very unicorns and rainbows on the website. But I think that speaking to somebody who's worked there, specifically somebody who may have formerly worked there and has left, I think they'll give you a lot more candid feedback. Now, you have to also take that with like, everybody's experience is going to be different, but if you speak to multiple people, both maybe inside and outside the organization, you can start to hear some, commonalities in those responses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So utilizing, it sounds like people who have experiences at that company. I also saw someone support that, Treasure, in the chat. They mentioned using Glassdoor, which again, based off of community, right? People submitting their reviews. So definitely a good framework to be working from. Anyone else? Reviews online, yes, and yes, absolutely. And this is something, and Treasure, you mentioned this beautifully, no company, right, is going to put their trash values necessarily on display or speak poorly about kind of what they believe in, 100%. Something else that we'll talk about here more specifically is a few kind of concrete things to look at in addition to kind of seeking out others' perspectives, Glassdoor, reaching out to others on LinkedIn to kind of get some information, do informational interviews, things like that. Some other kind of quick ways I wanted to share with the group that I have found helpful, but I also would love to hear from you all on, is kind of looking at 5 different areas to identify what a company values. And the first one is doing research on the leadership team and what does representation look like there. Oftentimes within, I think, certain spheres, we'll find that there can be some homogeneous leadership at the table. But so if there's a certain set of values that, talk a lot about, DEI and B, but then it doesn't really seem like that's illustrated through leadership or through who is being hired, I think that kind of, may raise some questions to bring to the table during an interview, or it may start to kind of allow us to dig a little bit deeper. So leadership and representation and doing some digging there. Inclusive language and word choice. This is something more and more in my personal experience as I've been doing some digging. I've found a difference with some companies that will use kind of binary language when referring to gender, or they don't, and their benefits, right? They don't really disclose some of those specific things that would be inclusive to people from different backgrounds. So I think word choice is important. Inclusive language would be important. That can mean a lot of different things, but kind of something to pay attention to. Benefits and pay transparency. A few of us mentioned this, right? As valuing, what is the actual financial situation if I were to work here? How many times have we looked at job postings? I'm sure we can all agree on this. Feel free to raise your hand if you agree, or do a thumbs down if you disagree, but you have gotten really interested in a job, maybe even started to dig in and then come to realize, they didn't list the pay. And then you come to find out that it's, 20, 30 grand less than what you expected because they didn't disclose that on the front end. They didn't disclose anything around pay. And it left you kind of disappointed and wondering, why did I go through all this to know that it's not within my financial reach. And similarly with benefits, right? What benefits are important to you? Right now, obviously, we're in a time to where benefits encompasses, right, work remote or wellness stipends, things related to health insurance, of course, as well. But benefits and pay transparency are a pretty good indicator as well of a company's values. ERGs, of course, employee resource groups, do those exist? And then the really popular one right now, D&I statements, right? This is something that I know we have all seen a shift in, and this is of course, backed by data. There's been a lot of kind of quote unquote raised consciousness amongst the business community since George Floyd. Unfortunately, in many cases, it may seem performative, and in some cases, it may be true to the DNA of the company if they've been doing this for a while pre-George Floyd. But this is obviously a piece that can be telling. Is it just a statement, or do we see indicators of a company's commitment to D&I throughout other parts of the process when reviewing what past employers say about them, what their data that they disclose to the public about their hiring practices, things like that. So these are kind of the 5 buckets that we'll talk a little bit more about, but wanted to highlight those. So yes, Lordina, sorry, I'll repeat this. So the 5 points are: 1 is leadership and representation, inclusive language in the job posting and in their website, benefits and pay transparency, employee resource groups, ERGs, and then D&I statements. We will also send this out, everyone, so that you have it. But these are going to be the 5 areas that we'll talk a little bit more about. Before we do, any thoughts, initial thoughts, or kind of anything that kind of resonated with you in this list so far, to where you're like, yes, I actually noticed something about a company from, the benefits and pay transparency that I loved, or something that I didn't love? Is there anything just initially that folks have thoughts on or reflections before we move on? All right, so I want to do kind of a quick exercise to kind of illustrate this a little bit more. One of the big questions is, is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, is it a statement for the company, right? Is it just something they put as a, because they have to say, we don't discriminate, or we hire based off of, what's the best fit, not discriminating against any type of person or background? Is that just a statement, or is it a true part of the company's DNA to continue to advance equitable opportunities and provide inclusive environments and a sense of belonging? Sometimes it's hard to tell, right? Because everyone has a D&I statement. So what we'll do together, I'm going to reshare my screen here. Give me 1 second, let me pull this up. I'm going to just pull up a couple of job postings that I think are helpful to look at. And I want to see kind of what we noticed together as a group here. I'm going to start with a company, and just disclaimer, I'm not going to put any company on blast. This is not the place for that. There's some things that I think we could discuss too as to what are some red flags, but I want to kind of highlight some companies that do this well. The first one I want to kind of look at is TXI. So this is a software company, and they have some really clear things on their website, but would also love to kind of hear thoughts on this. I'll pull up the job posting in a moment, but this is where the job posting takes you, is first to their landing page. So I'm going to pause here just so people can see it. They highlight a few things here. When you scroll down, again, this is their kind of landing page. This is where it takes you as it relates to their vision and what they define as DEI and B. So I'm going to just scroll in silence for just maybe 30 seconds. And then I want to hear people's just initial thoughts. What is your first impression when you're just looking at this? Oh, Saman, yes, go ahead. I see your hand is raised.
Yeah. So just a background, like DI is more, as per my observation, is more of a checklist majorly at a lot of firms, but they do not solely consider it much. It's more of that you've ticked it off and it's there, but how you're actually putting it forward for your employees and everything is totally different on how you show it. So as per this example that I see it on the screen, it's more of you've just written things. You've just given us a definition and things of that sort. No offense to TXI, please. But it's more of how you put it forward for your employees in a pictorial format, or, what you've done. And it's more of that speaks volume for you rather than just writing things about it that you believe in it. Everyone believes in it, I know. But how do you project it forward for your organization is something we would like to see it. Because what we see it is what actually sells out. So it's something that I would want to see. Maybe it may be different for other people, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up, right? And I think what's interesting here is they define it as to how they view it. Something else that I think is interesting is that if you look to the right, and this is not every company obviously lays it out this directly, but they make a point to list out through each section their report as to kind of what their history is. So for this company specifically, they walk you through their history within the space of DNIB. And so they talk through kind of through a timeline. This is, as a company, their trajectory. And then they include a report of kind of their reflections, and they formalize this every year. So this is something that, again, I think is interesting, but I'm also welcoming of thoughts here of areas in which they've identified as a company that they value, they want others to see, and what that looks like. So I'm clicking through just to show a few things, but again, anyone else who has thoughts, please bring those to the table as we're looking at this together. Because this is something that's a little bit unique, I think, with the report part. So what are folks' thoughts on this? What's your first kind of instinct when you're seeing this? Does it resonate? Simone, like you just mentioned, right? It's a checklist. It may say things that they believe, but what does that actually mean, right? What does that actually look like in your company? Is there anything so far on the surface that we feel this company is doing that's moving that needle forward? Or does it feel like it's not informative yet? What are people's initial thoughts as we're looking at some things?
Well, if you go back to the homepage, what I liked was so if you go back to the website,
Yeah.
let
me go
I
back.
think there was a bit more intentional. And so it was action words and not just statements, right? So if you scroll back up, here. So it's our responsibility and duty to create the conditions, instead of so many people who just say, we think this matters, right? And so I know that those are just words, but it's from their diversity report. And that in and of itself, they've gone that way to have a diversity report, right? And like you said, you can now see the historical elements if you go fishing a little bit. That's promising to me, right? That shows that they have consistently considered this as an issue, as a challenge, and they've put action towards it. That helps me feel more confident that it's not strictly performative, that it's not a one-off checking a box for accreditation or whatever, right? That there is some longevity to the efforts.
Yeah.
And I'm a sucker for semantics sometimes, but that wording means a lot. And so kudos to their communications team, but also, that's the kind of stuff that you read and you're like, gosh, I hope they mean it, right?
Yeah,
because
sure.
those words have a lot of power behind them if they mean it.
Right. And of course, right, there's a lot that a website can say, and you won't really know the reality until, working within the company. But I would agree. I think there's some that are using true action words to show ownership versus others. I think that's a good assessment. Any other thoughts? And I'm continuing to scroll slowly. I know I wish we could spend hours just looking at this. I just wanted to use this as our starting point. This, for those who aren't able to see, this is showing for this company, they have a roadmap to where they're showing kind of what the past looked like, of how they got here, what their future is. There's a whole, again, another kind of downloadable PDF that goes into detail about what their future looks like. And then now they're also highlighting their diversity report in terms of their accountability metrics. Any other reflections so far? Let me check the chat before we. Yes, Lordina said, I personally feel companies don't stand by the D&I statements they make. Yeah. Typically they're just statements, right? So this is, I would agree. And so what does that mean? When we see statements and then we see that we want to understand, I think Treasure, you mentioned this, what is the actual experience of people who've worked there, right? And how does that connect? Sometimes it's not always possible to get all that information at once. So what are some other things that you all feel like? I know we talked about language, we talked about inclusive language, we talked about transparency with pay, we talked about a few other things. What are some other things that you feel would be helpful to see about an employer to help understand if this is truly a D&I statement or if this truly is the culture? I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment, but anyone have thoughts on that from your perspective? What else is helpful to understand the DNA of a company beyond just their statement?
I would say consistency is a big thing, right? Like this is not just a one-off thing, because when we talk about DE&I work, it's long, right? All of us, I think, on the call are very aware of the long journey and constant, journey that we're on to make change in that way. And so that you can see this isn't just they had a DE&I day and then now they've moved on to other business, right? It's something that they're consistently focusing on, talking about, and that when you are speaking with different people, specifically in the leadership ranks, that their answers are consistent, that they vary enough that it's not just a canned answer that everyone says, right? I think that's something to really pay attention to, and why you should speak to multiple people. Because if you just talk to one person, they're gonna, tell you the spiel, if you will, and you're like, oh, that sounded awesome. And then you hear from someone else and they say the exact same thing, and then the person says the exact same thing. It's like, okay, how much of this is consistency and how much of this is just they've memorized what needs to be said?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Alicia, I think I see you raising your hand. Go ahead. Did you have a thought? You wanted to-
Yeah, actually, I was thinking like some engagement activities or something like Treasure mentioned, DEI Day, something like that, like making people feel inclusive and heard. So some activities where even if the people who are not comfortable, like who just come work and go back to their homes, so those people can also feel included and heard. Some activities, fun activities, maybe like that.
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And something too, and again, we'll look at 2 other examples. Something else that I think is interesting is when companies also are able, I'm going to reshare this, to connect their vision to also who they choose to work with. So in the same example, TXI is going to talk about, how they implement equity within leadership, having different roles at the table. They have a full D&IB team. But here they talk about clients assigned with D&IB goals. So I think this is also interesting. I think we've seen maybe bad examples of this in the past where we hear maybe about a company that we love or a certain fast food restaurant that we love that then is, partnering with other organizations that maybe aren't sharing the same vision that we would hope. And so it makes you question, who you partner with. So I also think this is interesting to see too, that they're pretty transparent with who they work with, right? And what they value and how that is implemented internally and externally. So this is just an example to kind of prompt us thinking about this and seeing it visually laid out. I think obviously to your point, that's been made here as well, is seeking out, is this consistent with people's experience, right? It's one thing to have initiatives and to have this, is this consistent with how people feel? Do people feel a sense of belonging? Do people feel like it's inclusive as well? And yes, in the chat I see it's not just about celebrating the day, but more to understand its essence is very important. Absolutely. Something else that I also want to show, and I'll pull up a different example here, is talking about as a job seeker, right? What does inclusive language look like beyond kind of what does D&I mean in terms of reflections on that, policies, things of that nature, but what does it also look like to be seeking out a job from an employer that you're trying to learn about and looking at their inclusive language or lack of. And what I want to highlight, I'm going to share my screen here. This is on LinkedIn directly, right? So this is going to be a highlight for the Obama Foundation based in Chicago, but also in DC. If you're not familiar with Obama Foundation, it's worth looking into. I'm biased because I'm in Chicago, but something that we see here, that's just an example. Obviously, the foundation has many opportunities open. So shout out if any of you are looking at jobs. Obama Foundation has some great ones. But what you'll see here, and I'm going to just scroll slowly, something that is noticeable to me is first going to be what they disclose at the top in terms of pay. The other thing, and I want to see if folks recognize this as well. I'm going to scroll down a little bit. I'm going to highlight the section that stood out to me. I want to see everyone else's thoughts. Let me scroll. I don't want to make you dizzy. Here we go. So down here at the bottom, this paragraph, I'm going to highlight it for those who are able to look at this. If you're not, I'm quickly going to read it. I want to hear thoughts. So this is the section after it lists the qualifications for this role. It says, don't check off every box in the requirements listed above. Please apply anyway. Studies have shown that marginalized communities such as women, LGBTQ+, and people of color are less likely to apply to jobs unless they meet every single qualification. The Obama Foundation is dedicated to building an inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible workplace that fosters a sense of belonging. So if you're excited about this role, but your past experiences don't align perfectly with every qualification, we encourage you to still consider submitting. So want to pause there. Curious people's thoughts on that. If you see that often in job postings, if this is something that feels like it's helpful to kind of know about the company, does it say anything about the organization? what are your initial thoughts on having that paragraph following a job description?
I think it's super powerful. I think, why not? Like, why everyone's afraid to do that? Everyone just assumes it's a robot that's going to be looking at these things. So that kind of a statement puts a little bit more faith in the process, I think, with that company, and lets you have a little bit more confidence in applying, or obviously just applying in general if you were reluctant to, but as someone who probably would apply anyways, it makes me feel a little bit better to be moving forward with the company that is making a statement like that. I think it's really powerful, and they included the money.
Mhm. Yeah,
For sure.
I also think that it is very powerful. It felt like somebody was talking to me, don't worry about it, it's fine, just apply, like that.
Mhm.
It was really nice.
It kind of humanizes it, is what I think.
Yeah, it gives it a like personal touch.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, like, we were talking about this point about transparency. So it's fully transparent if we talk about the pay range, if we talk about the culture, the format of the form for the interview and everything. It's very transparent for me. Like, what will I see next?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think language wise, it's interesting to see how different companies discuss what they're looking for or what their culture is. I think without them saying, this is our culture, they kind of told you what their culture is, which is, we know that if you identify within a certain group, your instinct may be to look at this list and say, I don't know if I should apply. We want you to know that we value you here. Please apply. So I think it's interesting. Some put it very forward with all these statements. Others say it in different ways. Any other kind of reflections on that before we pivot to kind of our last part? Be sensitive to time. Okay. So something that I want to share as a resource, and again, we'll send this out. Let me reshare my screen here, but something that I kind of want to share as a resource for folks as well, is that there is a DNIB index for many, if you are looking at kind of larger companies or just corporations. If you're in that field, this won't be true as much for nonprofits and such. But if you haven't, found this or seen this so far, there is a resource called Refinitiv, which they rank with a DNI index. Accenture was actually ranked #1 and continues to be, has been for the past 3 years. So we don't have time necessarily to look through Accenture, but Accenture is one that's worth looking at to kind of see how they are very clear with their culture and community, and what they highlight. Their website is pretty remarkable with it, but also just as one who's leading in the industry, I would say check out Accenture as well. But a few kind of resources to be thinking about is, again, we'll send the links. There's a lot of this process that I think evolves, right? And we're seeing that many companies, I think, did start with a statement, right? They started with having just a D&I statement to cross that off the list, to check that box. And obviously we're seeing that organizations, companies, nonprofits, educational spaces must evolve. Some choose to and others do not. Language is indicative of that. Other things kind of point to that. Here's a few resources to kind of look up. Feel free to use these at your leisure, but they do provide some data behind how some companies are ranked based off of their DNIB efforts. They take into account employee reviews, like we've talked about. They take into account their benefits, they take into account transparency, all that kind of stuff. I will say from my personal experience, I recently was about to interview with a company, and one of their values that I later found, it said that they have a winning culture, which to me was interesting that they chose that what they wanted to promote, right? But for them, that's what they wanted people to know. Like, yes, we're D&I inclusive, but also we have a winning culture. And so that kind of, to me, sent a couple of mixed messages. What does that mean? And then I later found that they mentioned winning a lot, right? Win at all costs, work together to win, right? So interesting things to kind of see more when you can look at data and other people's experiences. Want to pause there. Any thoughts or questions before we transition to our last couple minutes together? So the last thing I kind of want to close with is sorry, did someone say something? I want to make sure I didn't cut anyone off. Good. Okay. A last thing to kind of think about, and this is something, again, that as we're moving the needle with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and once we're in a new role, kind of what does that look like? Again, this could be a whole nother session just to talk about, but a few things that I think are important once we do land that position or we start at a new company is obviously observing first and then asking the good questions, right? Something that I think is a good indicator if those things are true is once we actually observe once we're in it. And these are the 3 areas that I think we can look at as we're job seeking, but also once we're in that role to continue to kind of have a critical eye for and identify ways to come alongside. So what does the talent recruitment pool look like? How are some of these companies creating pipelines? Many companies will be very forthcoming with that. Right now, there's several companies partnering with HBCUs, right, to recruit a more diverse talent pool. Is some of that performative? Perhaps, but is some of it also to make sure that they are being mindful that they have excluded a whole group of people through their recruitment? Yes. So this is something that I think is critical to be mindful of when job searching, but also from within. ERGs, this is something we hear a lot about, right? But knowing, is there supportive structures in place for people of different backgrounds, groups, and identities? And then lastly, elevating voices of others. Something that I recognize when starting a couple new roles in the past few years is that there wasn't ever a time people could remember when they were doing a pulse survey, doing a town hall, having open dialogue about employee experience. Sometimes we can learn that when we're job searching, sometimes don't realize it till you're in the job, that wait a minute, voices aren't actually being heard. There's assumptions just being made from leadership. So a few things I think we can identify and look at as a job seeker, but also once we're within the role, some things to continue to kind of have an ear for, and then come alongside and identify how to be a part of moving that needle forward a little bit more. Again, we'll share these slide decks, I know, or these slides. Again, here are a few more resources that we talked about. We'll send those links out. But for time's sake, that's all that we have for today. Thank you all for being part of the discussion and for contributing to this. This is something that we could talk about for hours, but I will spare you because you're all probably hungry and thirsty and need a bio break. But thank you for having me. I'll toss it to whoever wants to close us out on the SDEIB team.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was really, really amazing. And I think so everyone took something from this session and they would incorporate it for sure. And they would look out for those terms and for those inclusivity and all those language and everything that we learned today from the job postings and everything, and we'll make sure that it is part of our process. So if there are no questions, I'll just quickly want to let everyone know about the next session that we have in March, that is on March 1st. And if anybody wants to register for it, can you please take forward the QR code? You can just scan it and be part of that event and register it. And apart from that, that's how you can join our network. That's our email, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. And yes, obviously the QR code is handy for you to just scan it and be part of it. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking out time to be part of this event. We'll be having more such sessions coming in the future months. And please join us. And thank you so much, Heather, again.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. This was
Have a
great.
great
Thank
day.
you so much.